Good morning, everyone. It is Tuesday, November 21st, 2023, the 8th day of Kislev, 5784. This is Eve Harow on Rejuvenation, the Land of Israel Network. Very honored to have once again Rav Chaim Navon as my guest. Prolific journalist, author, also teacher at the Midrasha at Bar Ilan University and also at Har Etzion Yeshiva, known colloquially as Gush, here, not far from me here in Alon Shvut. And Rav Navon has a weekly column in Makor Rashon, which I read religiously, and always has some insights. And so I asked him to come on the show today to share with us some of his thoughts on what's happening here. We're in, I think, the 6th week of the war in Hamas. We have losses, soldiers. Every single day we get up in the morning and we see new names. I think it's 68 now, just from since we went into Gaza, not including the 300, I believe, who were killed on October 7th. And the situation is like a weird, like routine, but not routine. So Rav Navon, good morning. We say that now with some kind of a question mark, it seems, here in Israel. And thank you so much for joining me today.
My pleasure. Thank you.
So what are your thoughts on where we are in this particular day? Every day has its new miracles, I must add, and also new challenges.
Of course, I have a lot of thoughts, but maybe I'll start with a book I published just a few weeks before the war. It's called Mitkarvim Veravim, Getting Close and Fighting. And my main thesis, it was not popular then, my main thesis was that the Israeli society is much more coherent, much more united than people used to think, because, we were just few months, maybe few weeks ago, in the middle of an internal, very bitter, some may say even a fight. And we were fighting over things now we actually don't remember that well. And I thought, and I definitely think now, that the Israeli society, even though we have the bad habit of fighting among ourselves, is much more united than we think, and much more united than our enemies think. And what you see now in Israel, I live in Modi'in. Since the beginning of current war, we had 16 losses, 16 soldiers from Modi'in died in battle. It's a very, very patriotic city. Everyone goes to the army. Most of them go to, fighting units in the front line. And you see here amazing things. The old city is with the families, and you see thousands of people standing with flags in the street during the funerals. Like it's heartbreaking and an amazing experience. And you actually see that we are in this together, and we'll have to find a way to sustain this unity, even when we argue among ourselves, even when we have a very important issues that we have to solve, and we dispute, and we have to find a way to make our unity more concrete in our routine life, because it's there. We actually see in the front lines things we haven't seen before in previous wars. We see a unit after unit goes to battle crying Shema Yisrael, Hashem Hu Elokim. We see those little movies. People take shots from the front line, and hundreds of thousands of soldiers ask for tzitzit. Are you familiar with this phenomenon?
Yes. I know people who are spending all day tying the tzitzit, and I know one of my friends is even dyeing tzitzit with chelet now, with the blue dye. There's a whole movement.
It's amazing. Like non-religious soldiers ask for tzitzit. They say, we don't want to enter Gaza without a tzitzit. It's amazing. It's something We see units blowing the shofar before they get into Gaza, and religious and non-religious. And like we have this uniting legacy of ours, which belongs to all of us, and all of our soldiers want to be part of it. It's really amazing. And these are hard times, we can't conceal it. And it helps us with the challenge, the idea, the knowledge that we have such a rich tradition from which we take our strength.
So you jumped into a very interesting point. When we talk about the unity of the society, or even like if you just have a situation with a marriage where two people are fighting. So are they fighting to get to the same place, right? Like they're coming from different opinions, but eventually the goal is the same. Or are they completely not even looking at the same goal? And I think what happened here in Israeli society, and maybe it's changing based on what you're saying, I'm hoping so, is that the goals of different sectors of Israeli society up until a few weeks ago were not the same. There were people such as myself, and I imagine you, who are here because this is a Jewish country, because we believe that not only was this given to us a long time ago, but for very practical reasons, as we saw after the Holocaust, the Jews need a place of our own to be able to protect ourselves and be able to thrive and prosper as Jews, not bothering anybody else if they don't bother us, but to be able to really fulfill, like the Hashmonaim and the Maccabees were trying to do and succeeded in doing, and we celebrate Hanukkah soon, 2,200 years ago. But there were other Israelis who felt differently, who felt the Jewish part, they were more Israeli than Jewish. And I'm not putting words into their mouths. These are conversations, and I'm sure you've had them as well over the years, who felt this was Israel. It was a unique place, and we spoke Hebrew, and we have our own culture. But the Jewish aspect of it was less important. There were certain elements that were important, like Friday night dinner. It was not necessarily a religious meal, but it was a family meal. That issue of family is so big here in Israel, and I think is a very, very important reason why we are so resilient as a country and as a people. But the holidays were not necessarily religious holidays, or maybe not even celebrated. And what you're saying here, and please correct me if I'm wrong, perhaps, is that maybe we're realizing now, if the Hamas is coming to kill us, not because they want to take over our land or not any of that, they came to slaughter us simply because we are Jews. So if we are going to be attacked simply because we're Jews, what does that mean? Then maybe we need to live for that aspect of it. And what you're mentioning, wearing tzitzit and saying Shema Yisrael, are distinctly religious elements. They're not singing Hatikva, the national anthem. I mean, they are also, but you could say maybe this is temporary. There are no, what did they say? There are no atheists in a foxhole, right? Anybody who's faced with a gun and with imminent death is going to pray because there's nothing else to do. But the tzitzit are not bulletproof. They're not protecting the soldiers physically. It's something different. So the question is, do you see that as what's happening here? But not just on the front, the fighting front. Do you see it also happening on what we call the oref, the society that's supporting the soldiers, the families of the soldiers, society at large? And do you think that this is a turning point in Israeli society of understanding why we are here? Because then it makes fighting for what we have on a completely different level, maybe less concerned with public opinion and more understanding that the Shoah is not happening again. And we are now warriors, and we're going to fight for what we have, no matter what it takes. I spoke a lot. I said a lot of things, and I would really like to hear, what you're feeling about this.
I profoundly agree about the trends you see in current war, but I profoundly disagree about the trends you recognize in recent decades in Israel. I think that's what I claimed in my book, Mitkarvim Veravim. I claim that if you look 30 years ago and you compare Israel of the 90s to Israel of today, you see a country that is much more traditional and much more national than it used to be. And I'm speaking about the time before the war. Before the war, Israeli music Mainstream music in Israel became religious. You hear singers like Ishai Ribo, Hanan Ben-Ari, in the main radio station singing very popular songs about God and Israel, and our eternal faith and our belief in God. In no other Western state you hear this kind of songs, like mainstream hits. It's a unique Israeli phenomenon. I also mentioned another very, very important Israeli phenomenon, which is the Israeli family and the Israeli birth rate. Israeli birth rate actually rose up in the last 25 years, and it's the only Western state in which this trend happened. All other Western states, birth rate became very, very low, much below replacement rate. Right. And Israel is the only state in which the opposite process happened, and birth rate in Israel actually rose up within secular community, not in the religious community. The secular Israelis became more traditional, more family, more familial, more Zionist, more national than they used to be during the 90s. During the 90s, there was a popular, agenda of Medinat Kol Ezrachea, which means Israel is not a Jewish state, it's just a regular liberal state of whoever gets citizenship. And today, you don't hear anyone speaking about it. And you can watch the universalist left-wing parties, how much votes they got in last election in Israel. Very few. Like, I think, I have the theory that our internal fights before the war were what Freud used to call narcissism of small differences. Like, when we get closer, it makes us nervous because we see our tribal differences becoming smaller and smaller. Like, if you are a very liberal, live in Tel Aviv, and you may be progressive, and you see around you more and more kosher restaurants, and more of your friends are interested in tefillin and tzitzit. It has some effect on you. It makes you, fearful. What about my identity? What about my tribe? And from the other point of view, the religious community in Israel becomes more liberal. More religious girls serve in the army. Maybe I like it, maybe I don't, but this is the fact. So this process makes the religious leaders, more stressful. What about our daughters? What about our communal identity? This is narcissism of small differences. When the differences between us become smaller, it makes us nervous. And we didn't manage this process very well. We should have identified the source of the social and communal tension in Israel. We should have known that we are not getting apart. And if we had identified the source of this tension, we could have dealt with it much better, and we didn't. And I hope after the war, we'll do it in a much more successful way.
So, kind of the elephant in the room, and I was thinking about elephants because that's what the Hashmonaim fought against. The Seleucids came in on elephants, so I've been missing tour guiding and thinking about that. But leaving that aside, the big elephant in the room, of course, is the leadership. We're talking now about the society, about the people, and it could be that what this war did was just kind of speed the track that you were saying we were already on. But the leadership in Israel seems to maybe foment the dissension for their own reasons, because you want to get elected, so you have to keep your side hot and bothered in order to distinguish yourself from the other side. Not to mention just a lot of the trials that are happening, outside interference. We can't ignore that by, people who are meddling in Israel for their own nefarious reasons. And can the society, even if we can pull ourselves together, and I do believe that Israeli society is just incredible, what we're seeing here, when this war is over, can we get past those inclinations, and see past that, maybe get new leadership? Nobody knows what's going to happen here. But we can't ignore the fact that the Israeli people also, there's different parties, there's different religious pools. How do we overcome those issues, which are huge? The press, of course, also, which doesn't help for the most part, and only seeks to make their headlines are based on dissension, not based on everybody hugging and getting along. So how do you see us being able to overcome that?
In democratic countries, there's a very, very important fact about leadership, which is leadership adapt itself to the citizenry.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they want to get elected, so they're doing what they think their audience want them to do, generally speaking. And in Israel, when you have election like once in a year, or sometimes once in 6 months, they even the pressure on the leadership is even harder. So it actually depends a lot on us. And I had a few experiences of watching two members of the Knesset, two Israeli politicians from different and rival parties, speak among themselves in a very civil and friendly way. And then a journalist comes and light on his camera, and they start to yell on each other because they think that's what their audience want to see. So it actually depends on us, because we are this audience. And if we make clear to our leaders, to our politicians, that we want to see them seeking for the common denominator and not looking for more internal fights, that's what they're gonna do. I think that is what the Israeli public actually feels, and we just have to make it clear to our leaders. We want to see you leading Israel in a uniting national way according to our common tradition. We don't want to see you fighting. And if we make it clear, they'll get it. They want to get elected by us.
Yeah, but then we have the whole issue of the system of government, which doesn't always lead the people who are running to necessarily listen to the constituents, because they're not directly answerable to us. We don't directly elect people, it's parties. So, I don't know if this is the time to change that as well. And that's something all Israelis agree on also, is that the system doesn't really work. So to take that idea...
In the United States, the system is much different, and they have the same problems.
Yeah.
It's something about the education and culture more than about the system, because system in Israel and the system in England and the system in the United States, we have very, very different political systems, and we have the same, the same argumentative and an unpleasant political environment in most Western countries. So it must be something of the environment, the cultural and spiritual environment, more than a question of actually the political system.
Well, and I'm not speaking about all politicians here, but it seems that many politicians forget that they're supposed to be there as public servants, that they're elected. In the olden days, Begin, Shamir, Ben Gurion, they felt like it was really a shlichut. It was like even a holy mission. I'm not saying in the sense of being religious or not, but to lead the Jewish people here was something bigger than they were. And they were humbled to some degree. And I don't know if we have that right now with the politicians, if some of them are there for themselves. And again, I don't think we can avoid the idea of the social media and of the disinformation that comes out. And very easily, for example, a couple of days ago, Haaretz a newspaper here that, let's just say I'm not a fan of. So they published a report that it could be that an Israeli helicopter that came to kill the terrorists and get the kids out of the party on Simchat Torah actually shot some Israelis. And with that, the entire world has run with it, and our enemies have run with it, that Israelis were the ones, it was Israeli forces that killed the kids at the party. Okay, so there's a sense of responsibility, I think, here sometimes that is not met, because information can go out, and in a second, it's like opening a pillowcase and go find the feathers afterwards. And that is something that they didn't have to deal with in the 90s, and they didn't have to deal with earlier. And there's a whole, we're on the world stage all the time, by second. And, I understand there's tremendous pressure on the politicians, but to just bring it back now to the war, for example. So from what I'm hearing from soldiers and my own sons, is that there's tremendously high motivation among the soldiers in Gaza. They understand the evil that Hamas represents, more than even Amalek that we talk about, and we understand now the wisdom in the Torah of get them out to the shorashim, to their roots. But it seems like, at least today, that that the government is perhaps going for a ceasefire, letting oil into, who lets oil into where they're fighting a war to the enemy? And there's a muddle of humanitarian needs of the Gazans versus the need to safeguard our soldiers and safeguard Israelis. So it seems like there's a distance now between what the soldiers are doing and sacrificing themselves for, and where government policy seems to be going. Like, what are your thoughts on that?
This is really frustrating, but let's look again, on the full half of the glass, because I was afraid of a much worse leadership and behavior of our leaders. I was afraid that they won't let the army even get into Gaza. They'll say it suffices to send our helicopters to drop some bombs. And right now, for weeks, our soldiers are in Gaza, are doing an extremely efficient job, which a lot of people around the world thought, it's undoable. Gaza right now is, it's the most, the biggest terror destination of the world, maybe in history. Never terror organization have built such a huge fortress, underground fortress, like they did in Gaza.
Yeah.
And right now, we heard over the years like frightening expectations about what would happen if a soldier actually get into Gaza. And now they get into Gaza, and the government sends them and give them support for weeks, and they're doing an excellent job, and they're destroying Hamas. So we talk about ceasefire, but it's actually months and a half, and right now the government still didn't accept Hamas terms for ceasefire. So they're not as determined as I maybe wanted them to be, but they're actually much more determined than I was afraid they would be.
Mm-hmm. But, if we don't go all the way on this, then these soldiers that have been killed and the sacrifices that have been made. So we take Hamas, maybe permanently, maybe just give them a hard blow out of Gaza. And then there's pressure to have the Palestinian Authority come in and take over, which was the problem from the very beginning, and the crime of Oslo. I mean, essentially, we have people who are making the decisions who are responsible for the mess that we're in right now. And so that, I know you're looking at the cup half full. I'm looking at it. I'm looking at the other side of it right now. And where we're going with this, is it going to be just another mow the lawn, as they talked about in the last few years, where we gave them a big blow, but then we pulled away and they let that, and they grew again. And that's, I think, what a lot of Israelis are wondering. And of course, the big question, and also maybe here you can give us, you are a rabbi, so I want to take advantage of your religious knowledge as well. The issue of the hostages has become probably the biggest issue, and seems definitely that it's impacting the way that the war is being fought. How are you seeing that in terms of the hostages? Because if there's going to be a ceasefire, it's going to be to let some hostages out. What are your thoughts on this whole tragic, beyond words situation with the hostages?
First of all, I might say you mentioned the responsibility of our leaders to the terrible massacre of Simchat Torah, and of course,
right.
They are responsible and they'll have to pay after the war. Right now, they say, Prime Minister and the Secretary Gallant, they both say that they won't let Hamas survive, that they will destroy Hamas. And let's believe them. Maybe they do it in a slower way than we had wanted, but they actually do it. Let's believe them that they're gonna go all the way. And about the hostages, this is really heartbreaking because in our tradition we have a lot of incidents and a lot of discussions about Jewish hostages, and we know that the Jewish tradition commands two basic principles. One is that the redemption of hostages must be, a superior mission. They suffer, and our thoughts and heart and the actions must be with them. But the second principle is that you should think also about the future of the community, and you don't want to encourage those terrorists to take another hostages
right.
Whenever they can. So we must.
You don't want to reward them for taking hostages.
So we must take into account also the national interest. So let's hope really our leadership can balance those two interests and give us some solution. We'll have to give Hamas something to get, if we can get our hostages back. But let's hope our leaders are actually determined to save the hostages and also determined not to pay too much price for it, because we'll all have to pay this price, God forbid.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, if they're hiding the hostages in the tunnels, then obviously it prevents Israel from just blowing up the tunnels if there were just terrorists inside, because we don't want to.
It's heartbreaking, the conflicts. But again, let's look about the actions of Tzahal. People were saying Tzahal couldn't manage with the tunnels. Right now, they're doing it very well. I hope they have more solutions, more ideas. Like, they are determined. Our units are very professional. And, when I speak with actually officers and soldiers going out from Gaza to these short vacations they got. And
48 hours.
I asked them only one question. Do your superior officers know what they are doing? And all told me, yes, they know. They are professional. They are determined. And it's so relieving to hear it, because in previous wars, that wasn't always the answer I got.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I am also getting that impression. Obviously, this isn't a scientific poll, but that in Gaza, the commanders and the soldiers they know exactly what they're doing. They're trained, they're motivated, and they understand. And that's something I'm not sure, many of our listeners are from all over the world, in very big countries that perhaps have not fought a war on their own terrain ever, or certainly for a very long time. And as we saw in Simchat Torah, we have people who live literally 100, 150 meters from an enemy that is trying to destroy us. This is not like some theoretical thing. And we saw this on Simchat Torah very, very, very clearly. And there are people who, unless this is taken care of, are not going to go back and live in those communities. And in the north as well, which we didn't even bring up, that's kind of a waiting to happen situation with Hezbollah in the north. One of my sons is serving there, and he spoke to someone with him who lives in Rosh Hanikra, which is really at the very top, right there near with Lebanon. And he said he's not going home until Hezbollah is rooted out. He can't now we understand what happens. It's not a nightmare anymore. And one of my daughters was one of that was her job in the army 10 years ago, is to be one of the spotters, the tatzpitaniyot, the girls who look through the cameras and see the dangers. And it's come out now, at least here in Israel, some of them saying that they were warning already for months that they were seeing suspicious activity and they weren't listened to. But she told me that during her service, this exactly what happened on Simchat Torah was their nightmare. And it happened. And some of the tatzpitaniyot paid with their lives, and some were taken hostage. So the worst case scenarios, we got a glimpse of it. Obviously, it could have been so much worse and on an even bigger scale. But we got a taste of what our enemies around us would like to do to us and how we cannot let them do that. And I think we're all sitting here, hoping that even if the world doesn't understand, and this is an incredibly difficult question, I don't know if you can answer, I don't know if anyone can answer it. At what point does Israel say to the world, listen, with all due respect, this is what we need to do to survive? Because I'm sometimes getting the feeling that the world doesn't really want Israel to live in peace and doesn't want the Jews to really have it okay. Like they'll give us a little pat on the head right now. Okay, you're very angry over what happened on that Shabbat. So go deal with Hamas and go get your rage out up until a certain point. And then already we're not going to let you do that. And at what point do we say we are a sovereign state and we have to make our own decisions, because this is existential. It's not about world opinion anymore. Our existence depends on this. Do you think we have that in us to be able to do that?
I really hope so, because, in the bottom line, the world respects winners. The world doesn't respect losers. So if we want the respect of the world, we don't need a better hasbara. We need a better. we need
PR, public relations. Yes.
Yeah, we need better results. We need a very determined winning point. So let's hope that's what we're gonna do. And right now, I understand your tendency to criticize the leaders because they really deserve this criticism. But right now, I want to encourage them about the good things they do. They're actually doing much better than I thought they would. So let's encourage the good things they do, and let's hope they'll continue, be so determined until we actually crush Hamas and hopefully Hezbollah, and then the world will respect us.
Yeah, I think Israelis do feel that. We had no friends until after 1967, really, because who wants to be friends with the weakling? Why put your faith in something that's just so temporary? But I do believe, just to end up, because you have to go and teach, the Jewish element cannot be taken out of here. And I know that I get mail from some of my listeners here on the podcast who are not Jewish, but who say, you are God's people in the world. We know that you are here to fight the evil that some of us don't have the strength or the will or the understanding to fight. There's a bigger picture here beyond a little state trying to survive in a very crazy Middle East. It's a picture almost, as I feel, of a shlichut, of a mission that we were given a long, long time ago to root out evil that is so barbarian that it has no place on this planet. And if people would see that and understand that, we're not asking anyone to fight with us, but we're asking them to not stop us from doing something that ultimately will make the world a better place for them as well as for us. This is not just our fight. The fight against these barbarians, if they want to do this everywhere, and that's what people need to understand, that we are little people, but we are great people with a great mission. And personally, I could not be anywhere else, as difficult as it is. And I want to thank you for your constant, first of all, for your optimism, for being brave enough to write a book about Israeli society, because it changes in like no time flat. I think you should already be working on the sequel if you aren't. And for teaching what you teach and inspiring and inspiring a younger generation, because that is our future. This is what we're doing this for, is our children and our grandchildren. And for them to understand a much bigger picture than they're just going to get from, the news one day or a certain situation.
And I want to thank you and also your respondents. You said people actually send you messages of support from around the world. So we don't have many friends around the world, but those who actually support us, it is so, so supportive and so important to us. And we really, really appreciate those brave individuals who actually have the courage to stand with us against the cruelty of our enemies.
Right. Well, and they need to, because you have to take a side on this. And too many people all through history have kind of stood at the side, and then bad things have happened. So I just have to say that to my listeners, how much I appreciate getting the letters of support. I really do. I cry. Believe it or not, yes, the tears are never far from the surface. But sometimes we feel very alone here, and we hear just the negative coming from the world and the demonstrations in different places, in Palestine from the river to the sea, which means destroying Israel. That's so clear. And what's happening on the campuses. So with the positive message that you send, the prayers that you send, and whatever you do, I cannot tell you how much that is appreciated, and it punches way, way, way above its weight. So I want to thank you all for doing that, for tuning in. I want to thank Rav Chaim Navon for his steadfast faith and in good view on what's happening here. And may we just hear good news. And if a miracle wants to happen also, I don't think any of us would miss it, would say, oh no, that wasn't a miracle. I think we would get it very clearly and very much understand where it's coming from. So thank you to Rav Navon. Thank you to all my listeners. Eve Harow, Rejuvenation on the Land of Israel Network. Thanks to Ben and to Tabitha for editing the show. And to all of you out there, may the next week be a good one for Israel and for all of mankind. Take care, everyone, and goodbye for now.